Today's video is an hour-long compilation of horror stories to listen around a campfire. You can listen to this video in the background next time you're working out, tidying up your house, or while you're going to work. You can always leave timestamps down in the comments so your fellow listeners can use it to skip through the stories they've listened to. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit the bell icon to turn on notifications so you don't miss our next uploads. Thank you, and enjoy the video. I keep having dreams of things that happen later in real life. They're mundane enough to be mostly forgotten, but specific enough to be remembered as not being a simple coincidence. It's not just déjà vu. For example, as a kid, I had a reoccurring dream of being arrested and waiting in the police station. Years later, one evening after a really bad day, I was sitting on a bench, fidgeting with the cuffs and staring at the floor when I remembered I had felt this before, even though it was my first and thankfully last time being arrested. I once had a dream I was playing a video game I had never played or seen before in real life. Then, as soon as I boot up a new game in real life, I recognize specific details in the UI and that they were from the dream. A dream of a conversation I had at a party with friends and how we were seated. After the dream, I was sad because I thought I likely wouldn't see them in person again. After I moved back into the area, they threw me a welcome home get-together and we were all seated in the same room in the same spots. I'm not religious, I don't believe in magic, and I'm pretty sure the only aliens we'll ever find will probably only be simple organisms. I don't think I'm some psychic or anything, and I can't prove these things ever really happened, but they did, and it bothers me a lot sometimes that it can't be explained. It makes me wonder how much of what I'm experiencing is real. Again, one explanation, and not saying it is the right one, is we kind of convince ourselves of things. We create these false memories. You experience something and suddenly think, this is exactly like my dream, but your mind is making it up. There are experiments showing this happening. It's hard to trust your own memory because if it's wrong, you can't know without proof. My mom has claimed a guardian angel her whole life who tells her when important events are about to happen. I was always skeptical, but my mom always knew of something about to happen. I was 17 years old and started talking to a girl that would have a huge impact in my life, and I dated for 3 years. My best friend and I were planning on going to her volleyball game as she played club and varsity volleyball at the time. I've only been talking to her on my cell phone and instant messenger at this point. I hadn't told my mom what was going on or that I was talking to this girl. She randomly asks me that morning, "Who is this volleyball girl?" Stunned, I asked her how she knew I was talking to a girl who played volleyball. Her response was, "My guardian angel told me in a dream last night something big is about to happen with a girl who plays volleyball." I admitted I was going to a volleyball game that afternoon, and my mom was visibly wowed. That day began my 3-year relationship and my high school girlfriend. It's so weird, but this wasn't the only time. My dad got into a near-fatal car crash and my mom knew. She even knew where the crash was before the police called. She got to the crash site before the helicopter airlifted my dad to the hospital. Even the police were dumbfounded. My mom is a medium, no, not publicly, not for money. In fact, she rarely tells anyone, and I have been present while she is having encounters. Sometimes the spirits just talk through her, other times they're really physical manifestations in her, and it's scary as F. The worst time it happened was when my stepdad's dad manifested in her and she started swinging back and forth and rambling with her eyes closed while the curtains were swaying violently. I didn't know what was happening and just came downstairs in the middle of it and was like, what the F? My stepdad hurried me out of the room and told me to stay upstairs and not be scared. Of course, there have been other times, but that was probably the most scary that I've seen. Unfortunately, I occasionally see spirits too. Yes, see with my own eyes. I don't really like to tell people either because everyone's first thought is to call me crazy, and even though I am an atheist, there's only so many times I can keep denying the things I see before I'm like, I've seen this too many times for it to simply be a trick on my eyes. It's not like I sit around and wait for spirits to appear. I start seeing spirits around 5 years ago when my mom brought back a girl my age, her friend's daughter from Florida, to stay with us here in London for a little bit. This friend, her brother, had hung himself when he was 14 and she found the body. I was a bit wary of this girl because mom had never brought someone over like this before, and I was sort of forced to become friends with her because, well, she was staying in my house for a few weeks and was about my age. Even though I was wary of her, we got along and she came over a few times through the year just to stay at ours. But the first few times she would fly over were the worst paranormal encounters I've had. I'll say 2 of the worst ones. One time I was sitting with her downstairs watching a crappy action movie. Suddenly I hear the 2 doors at the end of the living room creak open. They were jammed shut, so to open them would need more than a draft because they are old doors. Anyway, they start to push open outwards and creak really loudly, and I turn to her and I'm like, "Dude, do you hear that?" She says, "Yeah, it's probably just the wind." I'm like, "Are you seeing it? Look at them, the doors. They are pushing open." I can see she is uncomfortable, but she was an adamant non-believer in anything paranormal. I'm really creeped out by the doors, and she turns back to keep watching the film, and I'm still watching the doors. Then out of effing nowhere, the curtains by the door start physically lifting themselves up. Like not a rustle, it was as if someone had picked up the ends of the curtains that were hanging on the floor, lifting them 3 feet in the air and then dropping them. At this point, I started really freaking out, and I was like, "Did you see that?" Of course, she's like, No, what?" She turns to look, and it happens again right in front of our eyes with the doors continuing to open. Now she's seen it too, and we are both like, F. I'm crying, and she's just silently freaking out. I was borderline paralyzed with fear. To make everything worse, while the curtains continued to lift, the door continues to slowly creak open. The curtains closest to us start to move. But they move differently, like someone is thumping on the curtains. This is my ultimate what the F moment, and I'm so scared I can't even move, so I call my mom on my damn phone to come downstairs. The moment she comes down, everything stops. Everything. The doors, the back curtains, the curtains nearest to me. I'm still crying. I make my mom go upstairs with the girl and we don't go back down. The girl and my mom just start chatting about what happened downstairs. Meanwhile, I'm so effing freaked out I'm listening at the top of the stairs to hear if the doors will start creaking again. But instead, I hear the effing computer chair violently roll across the floor tiles. We have ceramic tiles all over the floor, so it's pretty loud and a distinct sound. I go to my mom and the girl and I'm like, "Did you hear that?" But they were busy chatting in my room, so they didn't. I was about 8 or 9. My dad was dating a really nice woman named Rose. She was very sweet, and my sister and I, liked her, but her house creeped us out. That sounds super cliche, but what can you do? So one night while spending the night, I woke up and had to pee. My dad didn't get a nightlight for us, so it was pretty effing dark. The room we stayed in was directly across the little hall to the bathroom, and if I turned right, I'd be staring into the living room. I walked into the hallway, and in the living room, something was in her rocking chair, rocking. I say something because I still have no effing idea what it was. It was white light, but in the shape of a person, sort of. It had a clear humanoid shape, but absolutely no features, just a, God, I don't know, it was just light. Warm white light reflecting off the windows and glowing and rocking by itself. And as I stared at it, it slowed down and looked at me. It didn't physically do anything but slow its rocking, but I distinctly remember thinking, it sees me. It turned its head and realizes it's not alone. I don't know if it was just my kid brain or what, but I calmly went into the bathroom, peed in the dark, and came back out. It was gone without a trace. The rocking chair was still. I went back to bed after that and never saw anything like it before or since. For anyone curious, it didn't feel negative at the time. Remembering it makes me pee my proverbial pants. But at the same time, I feel like I was accidentally seeing something I wasn't supposed to. The thing in the chair felt caught somehow, like it knew I shouldn't be seeing it and was just as surprised as me as I was of it. I guess I told my dad I thought I saw an angel because I had no reference for what it was, and still don't, not really. It took him many, many years to believe that I saw anything. I mean, honestly, who's to say? I know I am pretty skeptical in these videos because I really do appreciate more solid proof, but in this big old universe of ours, I am fully willing to admit we haven't come close to solving all the mysteries. Whatever you saw, it sounds like a sight to remember. Driving home from school through Southwick, Massachusetts, and saw a yellowish circular light in the sky, maybe 1/2 to 3/4 the size of the sun or moon to the northeast. It was just hanging in one place and not moving from my point of view even though I was driving. So I figured it was moving in a way that my perspective didn't change, or it was really far away. I lost sight of it when I passed a buffer of trees, and it was gone when I got to the field on the other side. I talked to my chem teacher later about it, and she told me Southwick is known for UFOs and there's some movies about it. I don't think it was aliens or anything, but I have no damn idea what it was. Just really strange. Unidentified, flying something. I really don't have anything that totally fits this category, but I was looking for a place to put it. I was in a dream playing some game about tanks. It came in rounds, and afterwards it would switch to a screen with a model of your tank with stats next to it. The stats would go away, and in seconds it would fade to black for a few seconds to load. Then back to the game. Well, at the end of one round, when the stats went away and the tank model was still there, it didn't fade to black. Suddenly, something came back. I must have remembered something from a different dream when I was a toddler or something. I knew something extremely bad was about to happen, and there was an obvious sense of panic. Almost immediately, still in a panic, I woke up. For around 8 seconds, there was a buzzing sensation that was switching between 3 tones every half second. It was a buzzing sound as well as the feeling of trying to unplug something with wet hands. No pain, just buzzing. I couldn't move, and when the buzzing stopped, I slowly regained my ability to move over around a second. I got up, it was creepy, and I was shaken and noped up. I remember one time when I was talking to someone in a lucid dream. I was starting to wake up, so I tried to go slightly back to sleep to tell the person that I was waking up and I couldn't talk long. But as I was falling back to sleep, I felt a buzzing, painless punch. I tried a few more times with the same result. So anyway, I got up from the tank dream and proceeded with my day. It happened again later, but I forgot the circumstances. Even more recently, I got familiar with it. I was dreaming that I was in my yard and there was some wild animal. I heard a robotic text-to-speech voice counting down. I somehow knew that when it counted all the way down, it would happen again. It did. It usually happens early morning after not getting much sleep. Has this happened to anyone else? It's hard to say from just what we read, but that sounds like it could be sleep paralysis. It isn't always visual hallucinations, but sometimes auditory or tactile even. I'm not an expert on it by any means, but it would be worth looking into. Years ago, my mother-in-law died in my living room. She had a massive pulmonary embolus, so it was sudden and traumatic. My significant other is a physician and was with her and our children when it occurred. I was at class. My significant other did CPR on her all the way to the hospital. A week after her funeral, I'm alone in the house at around 3:45 p.m. about the time the kids came home. Suddenly, I hear blasting out the sound of a million birds inside my house. I figured the kids had come in without me hearing them and had turned the TV on too high. I yelled, "Turn it down now!" The sound immediately stops. I continue folding laundry, then I hear the sound of keys in the lock at the front door. I walk to the entry in time to see all 4 of our kids come in. They all swore they'd just gotten off the school bus, which I could see pulling up the street. A month or so later, my significant other's aunt visited and tearfully told of hearing a bunch of birds singing after her sister, my mother-in-law, died. My grandpa, Mom's dad, passed away in 2003 when I was 9. Him and I were very close, so my mom and I would visit him at the cemetery a lot. About a year after he passed, whenever we would go, I would wander off and hang out by a specific plot of a 17-year-old boy that had just passed. My mom didn't think much of it and never brought it up to me until 3 years ago. We'd gone to the cemetery and I saw the boy's grave and was overcome with sadness and felt the need to Google him. I found out he died in a car accident and was a star soccer player at his high school and an all-around nice guy. For months, he would randomly pop into my head and I would feel extremely sad and like there was a huge weight on my chest. A few months after this, I went to a psychic with my mom and she asked me who the 17-year-old who died in the car accident was. She proceeded to explain to me that he's always been attached to me and he needs me to find a way to tell his mom he's okay. Now, there's no way she could have known this, so I was a little freaked out. I went home and found his mom's Facebook and sent her a message. She answered back a little while later explaining that she never uses Facebook, but something made her check it, and that she was also very grateful for the message. She also informed me that the next day was the 10-year anniversary of her son's passing. After I sent that message, whenever I thought of him, I no longer felt that intense sadness or heaviness, and I always make sure to pay him a visit when I go to the cemetery to visit my grandpa. Then last year, I went to the cemetery and my mom asked me if I had ever spoken to that kid's mom again. I said no because I would feel weird just messaging her out of nowhere. My mom said, maybe he'll send you a sign so you reach out to her. We got into the car and my radio of all the buttons started going crazy. My mom was convinced it was a sign, but I said it was probably a malfunction and I would need something clearer than that. Later that day, I was on my way to my boyfriend's house and I passed the road that the kid at the cemetery passed away on. I said, Craig, if you want me to message your mom again, send me a sign. Put your name on something. My boyfriend and I went to the Cheesecake Factory that night, and the first cheesecake I saw was called Craig's Crazy Cake or something like that. I was shocked even though it was something so small. I've had a couple of experiences like that, but that was one of the strangest and intense I've ever had. Hey, whether it was something spiritual or not, that's nice that you sent that message to the mom. I'm sure on some level she appreciated that, whether or not she believed it. I can't imagine what losing a kid would be like. I posted this before, but here is my possessed woman story. Spoiler alert, as a result of posting this last time, users suggested she could have suffered from catatonic schizophrenia. Was driving along and found a girl just standing in the middle of the road. My initial thoughts was to just tell her to pay attention, but it was clear that while the lights were on, nobody was home. During my whole time with her, she never uttered a word. I was left in a weird situation. She had done nothing, clearly needed help, but medically nothing seemed wrong. As I am pondering what on earth I should do, the girl suddenly starts spinning. Now, spinning is not illegal, and I'm starting to think this girl is one of those protesters that wind up police. I've dealt with Troll Station before. So, I think, crack on, spin to your heart's content. Then, she loses her balance and falls, whacking her head on the side of the police car. Great. So I call an ambulance, but she seems fine. Still not talking, but she is looking up at the sky. It's a nice day, so fine, enjoy the sun. I do some writing and look back at her now bright red face and watering eyes and realize she is trying to damage her retinas by forcing herself to look directly at the sun. That's a new one on me, so now I'm holding a book or something above her head to shield her eyes. Ambulance arrives and we get to the hospital, and now she has forgotten how to walk. Now, I'm 99% sure she is a wind-up merchant, but I get her a wheelchair. In the wheelchair, she strikes up a I'm a little teapot pose and keeps this up for the next hour. Zero movement, just frozen with her arms out. So I now have 3 potential situations. 1, she's pretending to be frozen in time. 2, she's suffering from a mental health issue. 3, she's been possessed. By now I'm convinced it's the latter, but I section her and leave her with professionals. A week later I call the hospital and they tell me she is still frozen. I mean, you can't really expect the police to be fully trained in understanding people with mental health issues, hence why social workers and mental health experts should at the very least be sent out as well on calls like this. Still, props to the OP for sounding like they handled this in a fairly solid way. Obligatory, not my story, but when I read this, I thought it was pretty effed. An elderly lady phoned 911 and requested that they send some policemen down to her house because she saw a shadowy figure lurking in her backyard. She was living by herself at night and didn't feel safe watching someone through her window. When the policemen arrived, the door was unlocked. They walked in and found the lady seated facing the window, and they went to go check the backyard. There were no signs of anyone attempting to break and enter, and nothing was missing. She had very tall fences surrounding her property, making it nearly impossible for anyone to get in. They did, however, find footprints on the inside of her home. It was quite possible that she had left the door unlocked and wasn't looking outside, but rather at a reflection of someone inside of her home behind her. It's a pretty good creepy story, but I think we've all heard this one quite a few times by now, right? I'm waiting for someone to finally surprise me with this and then be like, and there were actually footprints outside. They got over the fence with a ladder. Ooh. My grandpa was an RIO in Vietnam, basically the guy who told the pilot where to go and what was ahead. One day, him and his team is finishing up a mission, and one of his buddies in another jet barrel rolls over them. He then descends into the clouds. They never saw him again. He just vanished. They searched for weeks, but no crash site, no communications, nothing. Just poof, gone. I was an EMT for a while. We got a call about someone who was riding their bike at a breakneck speed when they hit a car head first without a helmet. We went over immediately. Despite the fact that it was broad daylight and we were in the middle of suburbia on Saturday, nobody even came to check on this poor guy. Seriously, the streets were empty. Usually a massive crowd gathers around violent accidents like this. So his skull was pretty much smashed in and he was unresponsive. It was the worst head injury I'd ever seen. We assessed that he had a major skull fracture, a concussion, and he was bleeding profusely. He was also missing teeth and had a minor road rash, but fortunately he wasn't missing too much skin. To give you an idea how bad it was, this was the kind of injury that most people don't survive. If you did survive, you'd basically be a crippled vegetable. Normally, we would have moved him off the road, but when someone has a head/neck injury, that isn't very safe. My partner, who was also training me as I was still kinda new, went to check his pulse while I began to unload our gear. He crouched down, felt for a pulse for a while, and then stood up and opened his mouth to say something. Suddenly, the guy effing jumped up. He didn't use his arms to pick himself up, he just effing jumped to his feet. It startled the two of us. He looked at us, smiled, and attempted to grab his bike. We tried to stop him, but we didn't exactly want to wrestle him to the ground given his condition. He gets away from us and bolts into the woods without his bike. My partner was in even more disbelief than I was. He just stared at me where the man had run off, mouth agape. Then he turned to me and muttered, "He had no effing pulse, man." I asked him if he was sure, and he swore up and down that the biker was clinically dead. We contacted the authorities for assistance and they sent a search and rescue team into the forest. I don't know if he was found or not because we normally don't get much information about patients after they go to the professionals. Keep in mind that this was the Pine Barrens, so they have a lot of ground to cover. My best guess is that he went to a loved one's house out of confusion. What I found odd about that is, head injuries bleed like effing hell, so you'd think the guy would leave a long red trail of blood for the cops to follow. You accidentally came up on an immortal who was dead and regenerating. They regained consciousness and realized they needed to get out of there to protect their secret. Otherwise, it gets on the news, the Kurgan shows up, and suddenly people are screaming there can be only one on rooftops. It's a whole thing. Cop here. Partner and I were dispatched to a welfare check. Elderly guy, nobody had seen him in a few days, mail overflowing in mailbox, missed a doctor's appointment, car hasn't moved, etc. We both know we're about to find a body. We arrive on scene and can't get anyone to the door. Look through the window and sure enough, we can see his foot on the floor in the living room. My partner's a corporal and pulls rank and makes me go first. Door's unlocked, and as soon as we open it, we smell a mostly fresh dead body. Almost relieved, we both enter and he tells me to check vitals on dead dude. He's obviously dead with lividity, dried feces on him, and dried saliva around his mouth. So I go to stand over him and see if I can get a pulse, at which point he takes a deep breath, rolls over, and asks why we are in his house. At this point, we both start screaming, "Oh craps," and "what the F's," as we both run out of the house. We called EMS and they transported him. Said they couldn't get a blood pressure or pulse on him. I think he died a week later in the hospital. I still get jokes about raising the dead. I'm a CNA in a local hospital. One of my patients just had a quad bypass open heart surgery and I went in to check her vitals. The room was dim and the hall was quiet. I'm looking at her and in the corner of my eye I see something drop from the ceiling out of nowhere. It makes a big clunk sound and I turn to see what it could be. There's nothing there. At that moment, my patient looks up at me and says, "My dad's here," passes back out. I finish my job and leave. When I would go to that floor again as a floater, I would hate to go into that room. Not so much working night shifts myself, so much as my work continuing through the night. About 7-ish years ago, I was working on a piece of software at my company which had camera recording functionality, but because of the platform and length of recording, it was actually taking stills every dozen or so seconds for a stop-motion film sort of thing. Anyway, one night I leave it going to ensure it can 1. Record its maximum length, and 2. Remain stable over long periods of time. So in the morning I get in and sit down and review last night's footage for quality and stability shake. Quiet and still office with lights on and a couple people leave, lights turn off, darkness, darkness, darkness. But there, in the faint light from outside coming in through the window, I see something in the office move. I started to go back and forth between frames when the lights went off and when they came back on, and it seemed a chair had turned all before anyone came in. I sat there and reviewed the footage for a bit before talking with my supervisor, who informed me that the last shift last night ended around 9 p.m. and no one had entered the office between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. I shrugged it off and continued my daily work, but before I left for the night, I left the camera recording again. Come in the next day, I reviewed the footage, and again, a chair or two had been turned. I told my supervisor again, who again assured me that no one was in last night, but now he too was curious and asked around and was told absolutely no one was in the office at night. So now my supervisor asked me to leave the camera recording each night. And every morning we came in, we reviewed the footage, and every morning the footage showed chairs moved and turned. Some chairs had moved a few feet even. So, on one of the last nights of us using this software, we pointed the camera directly at the row where chairs kept moving. Then, with there no night shift that night, we pulled all the chairs to the front of the row to see where'd they be the next day. When we came in the next morning, it was evident they had been moved, as some had been turned and one had been rolled back against the wall roughly 20 feet from where we left it. Reviewing the camera footage showed nothing moving smoothly, as it was 12-second frames. Only a set of chairs in a cluster, then a set of turned and slightly moved chairs, and one single chair 20 feet away from the others. We never got a good explanation. We checked with all departments and the cleaning crew. No one had a reply that backed up why the chairs would move overnight. Is it just me, or are the most kind of boring and mundane ghost stories the ones that feel the most convincing? I'm a skeptic, But stories like this make me kind of question things just a little. Like, I feel like there must be some logical explanation, but it certainly doesn't seem made up or faked at least, because like, who would make up something this tame? Oh, I've got one. When I was 18, I briefly worked nights as a care assistant in a nursing home. The building was a very old ex-convent and was pretty spooky at the best of times. There were 3 floors, but I was only ever working on the ground and first floors. One day, about 2 weeks in, I was sent up to the top floor to get something. It was my first time up there, and for the first time, it occurred to me how odd it was that I'd never worked up there before or seen any patients who lived up there. So I'm walking along the main corridor, which is pretty narrow and twisty. Being on a night shift, we kept the lights on emergency settings, very dim and on motion sensors, so that the residents can sleep. Suddenly, at the other end of the corridor, I see this dark shape. It looked like the Grim Reaper with a dark cowl and long robes, and was even holding what appeared to be some kind of scythe. And it was moving slowly towards me. I knew it wasn't a resident, as most of our residents were not ambulatory, and I was pretty sure none of them dressed in dark robes. So I did the logical thing. I turned without even thinking about it and sprinted back down to the first floor, where I managed to convey through panicky gestures that there was some kind of terrifying monster on the top floor. After about 5 minutes, my coworker stopped cracking up and explained my mistake to me. You know how I mentioned that the home used to be a convent? Well, apparently part of the deal was that the remaining nuns, who were all pretty old by now, got to continue living on the top floor without nursing care and use the facilities of the home, like cooked meals. And not a single person had thought to mention this to me. If I'd worked days, I would have seen them up and about, but the 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. night shift at a nursing home is pretty quiet. The shape I had seen was actually an elderly nun in robes and a head covering, wimple, with a crutch, not a scythe, heading down the corridor to their little chapel as she couldn't sleep. And not, as I had for some reason assumed, the Grim Reaper here to collect one of our residents. I switched off night shifts soon after that. And to be fair, I've had a few friends that went to Catholic schools, and I'm pretty sure they would have been more afraid of a nun than of the Grim Reaper. Honestly, either way, running seemed like the right call. Years ago, I used to work as a security guard in an abandoned site complex that is now a heritage-listed site. At the time, there was a company trying to sell their land, so one other and I were employed to run the graveyard shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., to make sure kids didn't sneak in and burn the place down and generally mess it up. One night around 2 a.m., when it was quite dark, the other guard and I did our hourly patrol. Whilst he circled counterclockwise, I went through the center of 4 different buildings to check for holes in the fence. While I had my torch, I saw a young lady who couldn't have been more than 22 to 25 years old and quite pretty, although a little disheveled. She approached me and said that she was trying to find some men who had taken something from her. Of course, being the only one around, I asked her if there was anything I could do, including phoning the police to come by. She declined with a short smile and seemed pretty despondent. Figuring that she might try and hurt herself, I said that I was here if she needed help, but it was a dangerous area, so I would escort her out. At this point, she gave one of the most blood-curdling screams I've ever heard, and tears streamed down her face, a quicker change of mood I have never seen. Taken aback is the least of my feelings. She screamed, "I'll find them, I'll find them," before sprinting behind one of the buildings. Took me a half a second to gather myself, but I started after her. Now, I seriously thought that A, she would harm herself or someone else, or B, drugs are a hell of a thing. She disappeared behind one of the buildings, and not half a second later did my partner waltz out from behind that same building. He had not seen anyone run past nor heard anything. That scream was loud. Long story short from here, it turns out that this ward was functioning before any of the normal guidelines came into force, and it was obvious people were treated worse than animals. Apparently, it was not unheard of for female psych patients to become pregnant, who knows where from, and subsequently their babies were taken from them at birth. I quit the next day, as did my partner. Nightclubs for me, thanks. Honestly, the fact that both you and your partner, who didn't even see anything, both quit after that incident? Yeah, I guess I can't blame you. If I had encountered that, I'm not sure I would have stayed the rest of my shift, let alone another day. I worked nights. While on duty, it was an extremely slow night. The only things out there were the stars. There was fresh snow on the ground, there were no street lamps or illumination of any sort. That's why I liked it. Every cop has their secluded go-to spot on patrol. Well, mine was an abandoned campground. Anytime I needed to think or finish some paperwork, I would go there. I would go there frequently, so I felt comfortable there. Not on this night. As I was sitting there, I felt as if I was being watched. I felt extremely uneasy. I would check my mirrors every 30 or so seconds because of it. And if I wanted to look outside, I would press on the brake because it was dark enough that the red light would show the surroundings. Finally, I started focusing on my paperwork and not on my paranoia. About 10 minutes goes by. Rapidly, my car started shaking violently as if someone or something were trying to tip it over. My paperwork, food, and duty gear were flying all over my vehicle. I couldn't see anything, so I did what anyone else would do and put the car in drive and sped out of there as fast as I could. I drove to the place with the most lights I could find. I didn't want to be in the dark. I tried to make sense of it, but how could something be that close to the car and me not see it? We have elk and beat lives, so that has to be it, right? When I stopped freaking out, I got to my vehicle to assess the damage. The force that moved the car had to have left a dent or scratches. When I looked, both sides of the rear of the vehicle were covered in handprints. Freaked out. No one ever goes out there, ever. I called another buddy on his phone to come take a look. By what I described, he was just equally freaked out. We both gathered up the courage to go back and look for footprints in the snow. When we got there, all you see is my tire tracks and not a single footprint. I haven't gone back since, and never will. I don't know, either you have a little more eloquent way with your words than your average poster, or this is just a made-up story. I mean, I guess even the more poorly written ones can be made up, so who am I to judge? I guess what I'm saying is I'm skeptical, but you do have a nice way with words. I do night patrol for a 55 and up community, and I have one woman who is annoying. She will call the front gate to ask me if I can check to see it. She left her glasses in her golf cart, took out her trash, opened her water bottle, and other stupid crap like that. But there was one time I couldn't believe what happened. I just finished locking up the pavilion and I got a call from the front gate that someone was stuck in an elevator. I head over to the building we got a call from and see this lady in her golf cart. I asked her if she called the front gate and she said she did, but never said she was stuck in an elevator but at the building. She used the elevator phone to call, so we thought someone was stuck. Now here comes the fire department and they are peed off. This guy ripped into the woman about a false call and threatened to tow her golf cart. These days he can smell the battery leaking acid and she said she will get it back to her stall. The fire department leaves and now this woman is expecting me to push her golf cart 4 buildings away. She is complaining, saying the other guards would do it, and I said that we are not allowed to lift anything over 5 pounds. She wants a ride back, but I don't want to give her one. I tell her to call her building rep and she complains it is too late at 11:30. After about 20 minutes of listening to her complain, I decide to push her golf cart into the grass and give her a ride back. She then states the reason she was out so late was because she wanted to go to the bank. In my mind, I'm thinking, are you effing kidding me? We get to her place and she starts complaining about my security company and how a unit got robbed in her building. Now I know this woman is crazy because we would have been told about it if that really did happen. I'm not entirely sure how this is strange, odd, or spooky. I mean, unless you're afraid of becoming old and a little senile, which, to be fair, I absolutely am, so I guess, yeah, you got me. Not a police officer or security, I'm a machinist. I worked nights in a shop and was the lucky one that got to stay and lock up after everyone left for the night, usually between 2 to 3 a.m. We had 2 production buildings. One of them was fine. The other was creepy as crap. After everyone left, I would leave the main, safe building and do the secondary, creepy building first. As I walked in the back door and came into the machining area, most nights the mills and laser would bang in succession like something was running between them, hitting with a stick on the way by. So I got to walk through there with that going on, making my way to the front of the building where the reception area was to lock the front door. I would pass all the conference rooms. These doors on occasion would be open on my way through, but be closed when I came back by. There was usually banging and pops that could be heard in this area too. The reception area itself was the creepiest. Once I would get into the reception area to the front doors, all the sounds would stop. Like it got really quiet and it felt like I was being watched. I'd lock the doors and hightail it out. Once I got back to the shop floor, all the machines would bang in reverse of what they did when I would come in, like whatever was running the other way. Like I said, the other building never makes a noise other than airlines leaking or the usual shop noises. One night, I asked another machinist to stay after with me to help out with some stuff. I also brought a camera. This was before phones and cameras were popular. Poor guy was freaking out when the show in the second building started. I took pictures all over the building. The only one that came out abnormal was the reception area. It had to have about 20 orbs in it. Needless to say, dude never stayed to help me close up again. It was creepy, but I never felt in danger. You had my interest up until the orbs. Folks, I can't prove ghosts don't exist, and I can't prove that orbs aren't something spectacular. But there are such easy explanations for orbs, and they are just the least convincing evidence of anything to me. I know lots of people swear by them, but they are just too easily explained away for me. Sorry. As told to me by my friend, before moving to the city, he used to stay in his ancestral house in a village. The people there had a tradition where on a particular day of the year, everyone in the village would make dinner, transfer a part into small earthen pots, and leave it on a small platform on the village outskirts for the souls. The eldest son in a family is the one who delivers the food. They are properly warned to not look to the sides or turn back, but walk in a straight line to the platform and back. They are also not to pay heed to voices taunting them, too. So it happens that my friend and a cousin of his are on their way delivering food to the platform, and he swears that he heard voices calling out to them. Since they were instructed to not look back, they didn't, but apparently one of the guys in the group did, and all the rest of them heard was a swoosh and a scream. They crapped their pants in terror, but did not look back, somehow managed to deliver the food, and ran back to their homes. My friend swore that everyone in the village could hear the boys' screams the whole night, but everyone was afraid to come out to investigate. It was as if somebody's soul was being ripped into pieces. The next morning, everyone woke up to find the decapitated body of the young guy in the village square, and his head was found on the small platform in the outskirts. The police came and investigated, but did not find any forensic evidence of involvement of humans or animals in his death. There were telltale scars on the body, but nothing that looked to have been made by a human or an animal. The case still remains as one of the unsolved mysteries in the books of the police. I'm not sure whether to believe it or not, but my friend is never known to tell a lie or exaggerate. That just means he's a good liar. But seriously, I like stories and folklore like this. Would love to hear more about where this happened and more about the culture and their beliefs. I was doing guard duty in the army one night. We had some training exercises in an abandoned camp facility, and my buddy and I had been assigned to watch over some vehicles that we had parked in a large empty warehouse. We were the only ones in that camp facility, as there was nothing else valuable that had to be watched overnight. My buddy and I had tied hammocks between the vehicles to get a bit more comfortable for the overnight watch when we suddenly saw a pack of wild dogs standing outside the doors to the warehouse. Now, these doors were wide open and nothing was stopping the dogs from coming in at all, but they just stood there, 15 to 20 dogs lined up at the entrance to the abandoned warehouse, watching us. Suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch, they all started barking and howling in our direction. I said out direction because when we discussed it later with him, we both agreed that it felt like the dogs were barking at something else in the entirely abandoned warehouse. My buddy and I were completely terrified. First, that we might have gotten swarmed by the dogs, and second, at whatever the F those dogs were barking at. We started to radio for help, but suddenly the pack of dogs stopped barking and left. It was as if they had never been there. That was a long night of guard duty, I can tell you. One day I hear a scream downstairs, so I run down and my mother is sitting there with her hands covering her face and the family laptop at the time on the floor. I asked her what happened. She proceeds to tell me that while she was perusing one of her ghost-watching webcam websites, she went to minimize the window and the face of Reagan from The Exorcist popped up and screamed at her. Unfortunately for her, this is her worst fear. Nothing scares her more than that face. I tell her, well, it was probably something on the site. It was all about ghosts and crap, so it wouldn't surprise me. Nope, I was wrong. Around a week later, I hear the same scream, the same crash of the laptop hitting the ground and run down. Same thing, Reagan face, screamer. I asked her if she was on the same website and she said no, she was on IMDb, minimized the window and it popped out. So I figured that it was some sort of virus that had a chance of popping up when you minimize a window, as it also happened when she went to minimize the ghost website window. Did a few virus scans, had a couple of results, and it never happened again. And she also stopped going to those filthy websites. I had a guy impersonating me all over the freaking internet for years. Started when I was 15, and last I saw of it was when I was 19. Honestly, I just quit looking. The creepy part is that this was an adult white dude, and he would send pics of me, a not adult, not white girl, to people and have these obscenely coquettish conversations with them. As a teenager, I didn't get it, but now I'm thinking he likely has some kind of sissy fetish and was really getting off on pretending to be a little girl and being treated like one. One time when I was younger, about 2008 or 2009, I was on Steam and I got a message from someone I had played with telling me that they wanted me to be their child, that they'd buy me anything I wanted. I later got a message from her husband telling me that they hadn't been able to have kids and they wanted me as their child. At first, I assumed it was a joke and ignored it, but the messages kept coming. They kept asking, pleading, and insisting. They said they could meet me to pick me up anywhere in the country and that they'd do anything I wanted. I never did find out if they were trolling. If that was trolling, that is some really weird and creepy trolling. Jesus, that is unhinged. Back around 1999, I used to sell software out of my apartment, sort of a side job to my boring office life. I had this really rudimentary computer, nothing fancy, but it got the job done. I used to spend hours and hours just browsing the net, looking for cool links, surfing the web, that sort of thing. Anyway, one night I fell asleep at the desk, just like full-on conked out next to the keyboard. I had my headphones on, so I shouldn't have been able to hear anything from the computer. But I heard a message pop up and I woke. I got a few lines of text from somewhere. It looked like DOS prompt, so I thought maybe my PC screwed up. I couldn't even escape out of it. Freaked me out. I went to a club later and this woman approached me. She called me by my net handle. No one knows my net handle. It was her who was in my computer earlier. She said she knew the truth, and I asked her what truth that was. She leaned in close and whispered to me, "This is the plot of The Matrix. Use a serious tag next time, OP." I pegged this as soon as I read software out of the apartment because that movie is the only instance of physical software piracy involving mini-discs that I've ever heard of. And I am ashamed to admit it took me a lot longer than it should have to realize what this was. You can probably go back and pinpoint the exact moment I realized. When I was about 12, I just started playing RuneScape. This was my first time playing an online game, so I didn't really know people would try to mess with me. I randomly started getting private messages from a player I had never met in the game telling me full paragraphs about how he is the son of Satan and something about his eyes being black and how when I go to sleep at night his father will consume my soul. It was pretty terrifying for a sheltered kid, haha. Didn't play much RuneScape after that. I remember I once had uncut rubies and didn't know how to refine them. I asked how, and someone said that if I gave him the rubies, he'd refine them for me. I realized right after I did it how freaking dumb I was. First time I used Tor and got onto the hidden wiki and crap, I see a link for hiring a hitman. The realization that I shouldn't be here hit me like a frickin' train. Noped all the way to the uninstall option. About 9 years ago, I was selling a camera on Craigslist. I got a response from a girl, or so I thought. We went back and forth about price, and then the conversation changed to a more intimate nature. She sent me a pic of herself and asked to take a picture of my dong and send it to her. I, being the frisky early 20-something, I obliged. Mind you, this was all through the original response from my Craigslist post. I didn't even give her my name. I have tattoos on my arms that were visible in the picture, dumbest thing I've ever done. I sent it to her and she replied positively. I then remember the conversation getting weird and her being flaky about wanting the camera. She actually bailed a few times, meeting me to make the transaction. I may have said something rude and then she told me that she would show all my friends the pic, naming all of them by their full names, with my tattoo visible in the picture. I would be easily identified. My jaw dropped and I was freaked the frick out. My tech-savvy friend at the time helped me figure out what was going on. Apparently, someone sent me a keylogger-type virus and was monitoring me. They took the opportunity of my Craigslist post to put the fear of God in me. Needless to say, I didn't internets for a while. Never send someone on Craigslist anything sensitive, ever! I've had some people tell me, you know, Craigslist isn't all bad, but you could technically say the same about Germany in the early 1940s if you ignored all that awful Nazi business. Guy in a website I'm on gets banned for going nutso bonkers, blames me, sets up change.org petition to be unbanned, and sends me r/death threats. Re-registers on the site as multiple accounts and tries to start more trouble, gets banned again, resumes sending me threats with the addition of pics of genitalia. Apparently in real life he's been arrested for assaults before, so I'm lucky he's across the pond. Not sure if this comes under the type of disturbing you are aiming for, but I once opened a link someone provided on a forum. It was meant to direct me to an answer to a question. This was on a school computer in the middle of an IT class. Immediately, a window popped up with a picture of a woman covered in crap. There was also an audio playing with a voice saying, "Hi, I'm watching gay adult entertainment." The window kept duplicating and duplicating, and the noise got louder and louder. It didn't answer my question. I'm very careful on the internet, often using aliases and drastically shifting any personal information that I post, so thankfully I have no doxing stories or anything. But what I do have is the most startling thing that has ever happened to me through the internet, although looking back on it, it is funny. I got crazy into the Ben Majora's Mask creepypasta as it was happening. I remember when the first Jaduceable video came out. I remember reading all the 4chan threads. I loved it. One night, the pasta progressed and Ben was supposedly released to the internet. One thing 4chan went to was Cleverbot, since it was the voice of the internet. Jumping on the bandwagon, I went to Cleverbot and asked if it knew where Ben was. It said, yes. I asked it where. Behind you, it replied. I turned around and saw the mirror on the wall behind me. I screamed and dang near peed my pants. Met some dude on Steam, sent him a fully clothed photo with a sign that said something specific, including his username. He was being really creepy and almost red pillish. Googled his username and found my picture posted on a forum with "I'll keep you all updated." Blocked him. Glad that was all I sent and my face wasn't in it. I was Googling all kinds of crap back when I was about 14 and got interested in the Illuminati. I went too dang deep and started freaking myself out about it. I began piecing things together and became a conspiracy theorist. I never posted anything, however. One night my brother's cell got a call, untraceable, no number. I answered it as we lived in the same room, small house. I had been searching Illuminati crap all night. It was 4 a.m. at the time. A man with a gruff voice said to me that they were going to kill my brother and frame me for it if I continued down this road. He used first and last names. I was freaking out a little, telling him that I was going to get him in trouble and to not call here again and to leave us alone. He ended the call by telling me that he'd put an end to everything I loved in this world and that I would be framed as going insane and be an award for the rest of my life if I did not stop digging. I told my parents while crying and the police could not trace the call. I was scared crapless for a year, but I am older and stopped thinking about it until now. I've started down the Illuminati rabbit hole, but always get freaked out and stop looking into it. Being a conspiracy theorist is my secret guilty pleasure. This will get buried, but when I first started using forums on the internet, I was about 11 or 12 or so. I shared a picture of myself amongst friends in a Harvest Moon forum or something, and I got messaged by some random dude saying he loved masturbating over my pictures. Being a 12-year-old girl, that was pretty much my first real exposure to creepy guys like that, and I felt sick. I had a few more incidents like that, and I remember one guy pressuring me to give him nudes when I was 13 to 14. I never did. Recently, my Snapchat got leaked and some guy started sending unsolicited dong pics. I just screenshotted them, blocked him, and laughed at his pathetic wiener with my friends. Also, when I was about 12, I remember helping someone out on a forum and the OP private messaged me saying something like, "Thanks for the advice," as the title. I opened the message and it was just this photo of a disemboweled woman with a cross in her throat. First time I ever saw gore and it freaked me out so much. Nowadays, I don't open PMs anymore because of the amount of gore and dead hedgehogs people send. Sorry to everyone who sent a nice picture that I never replied to. God, I hate sickos on the internet so friggin' much, and there are so many. So hey, guys who get upset when a woman on the internet doesn't respond to your innocent, polite messages, crap like this is why. Monsters have ruined the internet for a lot of people. Back in the 90s, I had AOL. For those of you that are fortunate enough to have never used that service, if you knew someone's username, you could send them an instant message that would first make a chime sound. Then the message inside a box would appear on the screen offering different options. One day I got a message from someone by mistake. I did not recognize the username, and we quickly established that the person on the other end had made a spelling error. I say the person because I was not sure as to their age or gender, and it seemed intrusive to inquire. I was doing the middle-aged retrained thing at the time, school full-time and work part-time. Somehow we went back and forth a bit about school work, then signed off. For about 2 months, I would get an occasional message from this person, maybe once a week. Always very vanilla, always about school. I caught on after a while that the person was possibly quite young, though their gender and exact age would remain forever unknown to me. I can't say I particularly enjoyed these interruptions, but I did detect loneliness and possibly a bit of depression from the messenger. What could go wrong? I was just being polite, right? Remember, this was the 90s. I don't believe cyberstalking was a well-known concept at the time. The last message I got was a hello-type greeting, to which I responded in a similar fashion. The next message said something like, "Stop messaging my child or I will report you." Who? I was at the least stunned. I thought it might be a prank, but if it was not, was I in trouble? I resisted the desire to type that I had never initiated a conversation, all of which were hopelessly innocent, which all sounded so creepy. I decided to respond in a similar fashion. "If I get another message from this user, I will report to AOL that you are harassing me." That was the end. It was an important lesson for me. Don't communicate with strangers on the internet. Don't accept messages from strangers. It may look innocent to you, but possible not to someone else. Honestly, that's some pretty solid advice. You never know just who you might be talking to. Not that creepy, but I was bored at work one day and I Googled my own name. I found a blog from a guy with the same name. I signed his guest book and left a sort of smart but humorous comment. Then I started getting emails from his friends and family about respecting the dead. I don't know if this counts as being on the internet, but something happened on my laptop that still haunts me to this day. A few years ago, I had noticed that my computer was beginning to go exponentially slow, and that the memory on my hard drive was disappearing. It became much more apparent once several fake PC scanner programs would begin to pop up every time I was online. After a few days of putting up with this, my computer would randomly shut down and let me know that there were corrupt files or some crap. It all seemed like the standard virus stuff. I'd had it all many times before, especially on this laptop. But because I was a poor college student and I couldn't afford to take it into the shop, I asked my computer-savvy friend if he could take a look at it. So I invited my friend over to take a look at it. He does a few diagnostic tests on it. I don't know what he was doing in particular. I'm not very good with computers myself. He brings up a screen that runs through all the files that might be the problem, and he says that it'll probably take a few minutes. So as we wait, I ask if he can get a couple of drinks from the kitchen. Soon after he leaves, though, the diagnostic test window closes on its own, which doesn't strike me as too weird. It was a crappy computer. But when it gets to just the regular desktop, the scariest thing happens. The computer screams. It screams a loud, bone-chilling shriek like a woman being brutally murdered. This scares the crap out of me. I fall back onto my bed, almost paralyzed. After this, I bolted out the door to get to my friend, but by the time we got back to my room, the computer had shut itself off. He eventually fixed the problem, wiped a good portion of my hard drive in the process, but he never found out what made the wailing shriek. Ever since then, especially when I'm alone, I've never been able to fully trust my computer. I'm happy to say that I tend to avoid viruses like this, as I'm just pretty boring on the internet these days, but man, viruses like that are rough enough without them screaming at you like a banshee. Jeez. Years back, I was working on a mural project with a nonprofit. Part of the gig was 1 day a week to teach the 7 to 12-year-olds art. There was an 8 to 10-year-old brother and sister in one group. The brother bullied the sister mercilessly. No other kid would get near him. They all knew he was trouble. We separated the two, but once your back was turned, he was right back, hitting her and even biting her. The last straw was when he took a newly sharpened pencil and straight up stabbed her in the hand. There was screaming, crying, blood everywhere. They called the parents, but I insisted on her being taken to the hospital as the pencil was halfway through her hand. The brother had no remorse and even a smirk on his face. His eyes were very dark and dead-looking, like in shows where they show a pic of a killer and people describe them being dead-eyed. The ambulance comes as the parents get there. This is clearly not the first time something like this has happened. Because they didn't complete the activity, the nonprofit wanted the two back for the next week. I flat out refused, which caused a big deal. I put my foot down and wouldn't relent. I told them that kid needs help, and so does the sister. Later on, the coordinator told me that the year before, they had to take away his drawings because he would draw pictures of kids bleeding and drew dead animals. Like, how many warning signs do you need? That kid needs help. There was this guy who grew up in the neighboring street as me, and he was just a really, really bad person. It doesn't sound like much now, but when he was about 11, he'd do things like borrow video games, never give them back, and then just swear blind he never borrowed them in the first place. This sounds minor, but it kind of went from there, really. As he got older, he'd start to steal money, beat the crap out of people for no reason, etc. His girlfriend took out a restraining order on him after they broke up because she was frightened of him. The best example I can give of what he was like was when he heard that someone had said something about him that he'd taken offense to. The person who'd done this was in the pub one afternoon with his wife and kids, and this guy walks into the pub, doesn't say a word, and just headbutts him in front of his family. But at the same time, he could be quite well-spoken and charming when he wanted something from somebody. And it's only recently occurred to me that he's obviously a sociopath. He's now living in a tent and addicted to H, and I think it was always going to go that way. There was a soldier in my unit who was a continual F-up, always in trouble. He had gotten a few Article 15s and things were moving towards general court-martial. He was restricted to post. So he decided that was a perfect time to hop in a car after drinking a bit too much, go roaring down a tiny rural road at about 70 and hit another car head-on. He lived, they didn't. He had absolutely no remorse. No remorse when he was recovering in the hospital, no remorse while in pre-trial confinement, no remorse when the verdict was read, no remorse when they put the cuffs on him and put him in the van that would take him to Leavenworth. In fact, he was spouting off about how the army screwed him over. F that scumbag. Yeah, I've heard of military service screwing some people up in the head, but it sounds like that guy had problems well before that he took into the military with him. Glad he's paying for his crime, at least. In high school, I helped my friend babysit a group of kids for a local church. The adults were doing some kind of Bible study, and there were about 6 to 7 children between the two of us babysitters. The main couple that were heading the group were the pastors of the church. The husband seemed a little weird, but mostly gave off pushover vibes, whereas the wife immediately made me feel uneasy. Something about her seemed off, like she was there but not entirely aware of other people or something, almost like she would be saying and doing everything in the exact same wooden way with or without anyone else there. This couple had 3 adopted kids, and one was a 5-year-old Russian boy that the mom literally referred to as the orphan a few times. She told my friend and I very blankly how we can't give in to his demands because he has little orphan boy syndrome, so don't give him any snacks or any privileges when he asks. The little boy definitely had some psychological and possible developmental issues, but was honestly one of the most endearing kids in that group and was nowhere near as creepy as the mom or the other 2 siblings made him out to be. The other 2 kept him at a distance and wouldn't directly speak to him, but would talk to us to communicate with him, like staring me down with tunnel vision and telling me Victor needs to stop playing with his napkin, as Victor was right next to them trying to tell them something and waving his napkin at them. When the parents finished their Bible study, the dad came back in first and played with the kids, including the Russian one, and he seemed like a genuinely kind person that loved the kids. Then when the mom entered the room, the entire dynamic shifted, and the dad and 2 kids stopped interacting with the Russian kid and became much more formal. And the mom immediately began lecturing my friend and I about how the Russian kid was not to be playing with his sister's Legos. She said something to my friend about how this is the burden God has given this family and we must follow through with it now. This poor little kid definitely seemed to have issues, but the mom struck me as being an insidiously sadistic and abusive person. The way her voice never changed tone and her facial and bodily expressions and movements never wavered gave me the biggest case of the creeps. I wish my friend and I would have known better then and had reported this to CPS. I've always had a bad feeling about the situation and wish I would have acted better to help those poor kids. The mom seemed like she could have strangled one of them, then calmly kept making dinner as if absolutely nothing had just happened. Good golly. "This is the burden God has given this family" line did it for me. That is one effed up, awful person. To say that about a child is just terrible. The first time a human being made me sick. I was new working at a jail and read this one inmate's record. Was in for R-ing a woman, then slitting her throat. She didn't die. Guy was talking to me once about his life. "Yeah, I had a rough past, but I got straight, started a business, but some stuff happened that got me here, but that's not important, yada yada." Dude, you're a murdering artist. My stomach turned. This kid at my music camp when I was in middle school. He didn't really talk to anyone and always played his cello very aggressively. Rumor had it that he kicked a girl in the mouth for taking his pencil, that kind of kid. Fast forward a few days and I'm hanging out with my two friends at the waterfront and we see him throwing rocks at something. We ask what he's doing and he tells us that he's trying to knock a turtle off a log. A few tries later, he clocks it in the head and it falls off. That same day, he went up to a bunch of girls who find a tiny toad in the sand and asked to hold it. He apparently tried to crush it, but they took it back. The next day, he's at the waterfront again, poking something with a stick. My friends and I investigate, and he's poking a snake. I knew that it was poisonous, so I told him to stop, but he whacks me in the arm. A counselor ran over to break it up, but understandably forgot about the whole thing when he saw the snake and just got us safely away from the snake. I grew up under the thumb of an abusive mother. Trigger warning, this is violent. I remember very starkly the first time she choked me. I don't remember what set her off, but she grabbed me by the back of my neck and threw me across the room and I landed on my back. I had a coughing fit because of how hard I hit the floor, and while coughing, I felt hands wrap around my throat. I opened my eyes to see her crouching over me, choking me. Her face was all twisted, but her eyes were different. Her eyes were all squished up in anger, but her actual eyeballs just seemed blank. She was so angry and so devoid of emotion at the same time. She just watched me sputter. I wound up passing out from her choking me. She left me there to wake up alone. I had bruises for a few weeks, a bruise all over my back, and my voice was gone for at least a week and a half. She never addressed it. I was maybe 8. I am safe now. Yesterday was a year since I cut contact, but I'll never forget that experience. That is both terrifying and heartbreaking. To think of a parent doing something like that to a child, and as a child, how do you ever fully recover from that kind of trauma and betrayal? I am so sorry you went through that. My dad. After a particularly bad fight with my mom where he ended up beating her nearly unconscious, he kidnapped my brother and I when we were toddlers while trying to avoid arrest. Not sure if my mom didn't charge him or what. As we were growing up, he started to beat my brother and I as well. He would act normal in front of his friends despite hitting us moments before they saw him. When I was 18, he tried to beat my brother who was fighting back and not allowing the beating to happen now that he was older and bigger. And when my dad started losing the fight, he broke a beer bottle against a wall and tried to stab my brother. I grabbed the pocket knife I was carrying and told my dad I'd stab him if he came any closer to my brother. My mom finally called the cops and they charged him with assault with a deadly weapon. The police sent him to a mental hospital for a week's evaluation as my family began packing our things so we could move in with other family by the time he was home. My entire family called the mental hospital and told them to be extremely careful when evaluating him. He had successfully manipulated people his entire life. My family packed our things and moved in with family he had never been met before. 3 days later, the mental hospital released him on good behavior and because he made a few cards to my mom explaining how he was going to be better and how he was sorry. On the way home from a mental hospital, he was spotted by a hardware store and bought multiple knives, a saw, and some rope. He put them in his backpack on top of his card, saying he was sorry and that he was going to be better from now on. He came home to an empty house unexpectedly. He messaged every family member asking us to forgive him and come home so we could talk things out. None of us responded. He used the rope to hang himself once he realized his plan to murder us had completely failed. I was not expecting just how sad so many of these would be, but I understand. I can hardly imagine much creepier for a person than to have someone who should be one of the most trusted people in your life be that much of a monster. Yes, a former patient of mine. I'm not squeamish like at all, but that guy creeped me out. There was always a feeling of unease, of lurking danger. He didn't stare or anything conventionally creepy. He was so ill he couldn't move without assistance. Just that feeling, and it was worst when he finally died. I've seen my fair share of corpses, and usually there's a feeling of peace and okayness. Back then I worked with very old folks. Not with this guy, oh no. It was pure discomfort hitting you in the face. A kind of appalling wrongness and an overwhelming feeling that this guy was not going to a nice place. I almost believed that was hell looking at him, and I'm an atheist. What I found out a week later was almost relieving. He presumably killed his own baby boy because he was in the way. The older boy wasn't so much of a burden, but he gave him into a children's home for 2 years. All because he wanted to build a house in peace. His wife was in another ward at the same time suffering dementia, and she walked around all day with a little puppet you weren't allowed to touch, crying most of the time. His living son was as much at her side as he could be. He told us all of this. He said his mother had that puppet for years, always searching for his little brother. He also told us he's just so glad that his father was dead. He never said father or dad, he said the full name. His and his mother's life were pure torture, but he couldn't leave her alone with his father. He didn't even want to see him or anything. I was just a kid and my parents were visiting my dad's mom and half-brother. During our visit, my parents, siblings, and I took a trip to visit a man-made lake that my dad was curious about just out of town. While driving around it, Dad noticed his ex-stepdad's truck and he pulled over to see if he was around. Out popped my ex-grandfather and smiles as he embraces my dad. I'd never met the guy, but I'd heard a lot about him and knew that he and my grandmother had been divorced for a number of years. While ever curious about this man that was in half of my dad's years, I hopped out of the car to say hello. Just half a meter away, I felt pressure around my body and instantly felt the need to be alert. Frightened by the sensation, I grabbed onto my dad and timidly said hello before Dad quickly ended the conversation and took me to the car. A few years later, after reminiscing on memories, Dad told me he remembered that experience and told me that he noticed I felt the man's evil aura, and he felt the need to protect me. A little while later, as an adult listening to my dad and his siblings talk, I learned that he had been in prison for assault and that he also assaulted his children. For all I know, there's probably more disgusting things he's done that I have not been told. But his children that still hold his family name are in the process of taking on the surnames of my grandmother and her relatives, so they don't have anything that associated with him. Honestly, really glad that I learned all this in a timely way and that my dad had enough sense to notice I was uncomfortable. Good on your dad for noticing that. A lot of parents would have been like, "Hey, don't be rude, go give Grandpa a hug." Ugh. My boss. She fought all the way to the top of the chain to be able to force a severely immunocompromised former coworker into working in a COVID unit. Her response to a patient punching me and me requesting to put a safety flag on his chart was, "But were you actually hurt?" Along with many other crappy things she does and petty effing comments she makes daily. Everyone bolts when they see her making her rounds. She doesn't have a single ounce of kindness in her body. Kid I shared a few classes with in middle school. I think we were both 13. He had a charming smile, but it always felt off to me like he was wearing a mask. There was nothing in his eyes when he smiled. He was in a lot of school groups, Kiwanis, Amnesty International, 4-H, Junior Civics Club, etc. If there was something to protest, he was the most outraged. If there was something to mourn, he was the saddest. If there was something to cheer, he was the loudest. But between those times, he was blank. If you were looking, he'd have a pleasantly neutral smile on his face. However, there were a few times I caught him when he thought no one was looking and he was just empty, cold. There was something just immensely soulfully chilling about him. One day he stopped showing up to school and no one knew why. Some of the girls in our class eventually went to his house to see if he was okay. Not me, I never wanted to be near him. It turns out he was the reason the neighborhood cats kept going missing. He got caught skinning a cat alive in an empty lot. The poor cat's screaming caught the attention of someone and he was busted. When they went to check his room, they found his kill list. It included every animal, all pets that he had caught, tortured, and killed. The list was very detailed. No clue where they put him, but I sincerely hope he never gets out. Edit to add, I asked a friend about it who was a neighbor of the family to make sure I was right in what happened. Apparently, he also helped look for the missing animals, both dogs and cats, and had a grief scale. It measured on a scale of 1 to 5 how sad someone was and how they acted. No one knew why he tracked that, and I'm sure I don't want to know. As a very vocal lover of my 2 dogs, I hope that person rots. I know I should want someone to receive help, but that is absolutely monstrous. And now I need to go pet my pups for a bit before I keep reading. My stepfather was evil personified. He was an alcoholic who drank massive amounts of alcohol without passing out, and he hid his drinking from my mother before they married. He had been married 3 times before, but only told us about one. My sister, who was 14 years old, nearly 15 years old, was immediately the scapegoat and treated badly. He would watch her get into and out of the bathtub. When he put his hand down her panties and tried to R her, she begged our mother for help. She slapped my sister for trying to steal her man. My sister was able to get an older brother to take her in 150 miles away. They left me alone at home at almost 11. He had been trained by the Marines as an interrogator, translate to torturer. He decided to use me to maintain his skills and to toughen me up. My mother knew, actually watched, and laughed. I've required multiple surgeries and lots of therapy. Eventually, my mother kicked him out. He stuffed rags into the chimney to try and kill us with carbon monoxide. He took a job at my school so that I would have to see him regularly. I think this qualifies as pure evil. Gonna go ahead and put your mom on that list as well. I am so sorry what you and your sister had to go through. Anyone out there, if you are in a situation like this, find an adult you can trust and try to get help. I know it doesn't always end well. No system is perfect, but staying with people like this is even more dangerous. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.